So I'm going to hand it over to Scott and Theresa, and they are going to share with us lots and lots of knowledge and experiences studying whales.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. These are humpback whales that are in front of you. And I always like to put this on to show people who haven't been in the water with whales how graceful they are and how they don't bump into each other. You can see how they can swim right over each other. And also the size difference between a human and a humpback whale. Now this humpback, which is now on top, appears to be very pregnant. And this footage was taken off of Hawaii. And you can tell these are North Pacific humpback whales by the color of the flippers, which are black. Your Gulf of Maine humpbacks have white flippers. The North Atlantic humpbacks all have white flippers. North Pacific humpbacks have dark flippers. Humpbacks in other parts of the world have white that comes up over their sides. So a little different everywhere, but you can readily see where if you're watching a nature show and they have humpback whales and they have black flippers, it was not taken on the East Coast. Okay, we'll move on here. It's this whale, this is the second whale here that appears to be very, very pregnant. And this would have been the calving ground in Hawaii in the wintertime where this was taken. And that's the right place for her to be to have a calf. Okay, the right button. We are going to talk today about the Eastern Pacific gray whale and the North Atlantic right whale. First, the North Atlantic right whale, which is the most endangered of the large whales, with a population now of less than about 345. You'll hear different numbers on these different tapes depending on when they were made, but the population is down to about 345 right now. And the reason we can be so specific about that is because there are so few, and they're cataloged by these callosities that you see on the face and around the face and head, those white marks. Those are actually thickened skin growths around the face and head, around the eyelids of right whales, and they're in a different place on each whale. So you take a mugshot of a right whale, and that's how you photo ID them, is to get a photo of the head when they come up to breathe, and then you have cataloged that whale. You got it down to the individual level, because no two whales have the callosities in exactly the same place. And we have this problem with Noyo. Get part of that off. Okay, that's fine. Can you get the laser thing?
Oh, you can't see it. Can't see it.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
All right. Done. Okay. I was going to use my laser pointer like we do in lectures, but point out things on the screen. I'll just have to describe. The North Atlantic right whale is about 45 to 50 feet long, and they are getting smaller because the food supply in the Gulf of Maine and the greater North Atlantic is diminishing, which is one reason their population is diminishing. So their overall size is diminishing as well. And we lost a great hero and mentor recently in Roger Payne. Many of you know who he is from his initial recordings of humpback whale songs back in the 70s, early 70s, with Scott McVeigh off of Bermuda and others, a guy named Teddy Tucker. And he died in June. And I didn't know Roger had died until I got an email from a friend. But this covers up part of his quote. It's on the screen.
They can see it.
Okay, you can read that. As my, he says, my days are, he said, limited or running out. I am possessed with the hope that humans worldwide are smart enough, adaptable enough to put the saving of other species where it belongs at the top of the list of our most important jobs. I believe that science can save or survive, help us, save us to survive our folly. Should have written that one down. Okay, we're all going to miss Roger very much. So
let me just see if I could fix something here.
Tree wants to get under the hood here, so
yeah, that help? Yeah.
Yeah,
that might help.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Oops.
Now it won't go.
No.
Uh-oh, what'd I do? Let's see. Oh dear. Okay, sorry.
Nice sound.
Yeah.
We can see it fine, Scott and Theresa.
Okay, just can't seem to advance it now. Let's see, share screen. Okay. Oh no, I don't want to leave. Sorry. Oh, all right. I see what I did. Oh no. I was trying to help. Okay, here it is. Okay. And what does it say? Share?
Yeah.
Okay, now we'll advance. There we go.
Okay. See these two right whales here, and you see the scarring from past entanglements around the tailstock and around the flukes, and the callosity pattern on. It's the same whale, one from the air, or both from the air, and you can photo identify whales by a good photograph from a plane as well as from a boat. You just get a different angle on the photograph. And let's see what we can see here. The mouth line, maybe this cursor helps. The mouth line here of a right whale really swings down below the eye. That's not the eye, that's the callosity. You can't quite see the eye in the photo here, but they have a very curved mouth like most of these large whales do. So when the top jaw here opens, which you'll see in a few slides of feeding, some footage of our right whale feeding, you'll see just how wide this can open. Okay. All right, the migration grounds of the North Atlantic right whale, we have up here in the Gulf of Maine, which runs from Provincetown, Cape Cod, a little bit offshore, and then up the coastline into the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia, and then down around George's Bank. So it's a circular shape, and actually circulation patterns of water also move around the Outer Banks and then up into the Gulf of Maine. The Labrador Current kind of flushes this area out and keeps us cold, which you may have noticed there in southern Maine already. But as far as right whales go, feeding takes place in the spring off of Cape Cod, lower Massachusetts Bay, and right in here in Cape Cod Bay, and then outside here around the National Seashore. If you walk on Race Point in Provincetown in April, you should see several dozen right whales feeding with their mouths wide open right off of the lower part of the Cape here, right below Provincetown, just below Provincetown. And then in the summer, they begin moving offshore. Some move offshore, and others follow along the coastline of New Hampshire, out of Massachusetts to New Hampshire, along the coast of Maine, and up into the Bay of Fundy, or at least they were until a few years ago. This is Roseway Basin out here, which is off of Nova Scotia. And these whales were feeding up into this area. And but now, with the warming of the waters in the Gulf of Maine, it's around 2010, somewhere in there, a little later than that. The research teams arrived in the summer in the Bay of Fundy, around Lubec, Maine, to work on the Bay of Fundy. And there was one right whale around, and not dozens like they had been expecting. There was only one, and nobody knew where they went. And there was a great deal of talk in the fall at a conference I was at as to where did they go. Well, the next year, we found out, sadly, very quickly where they went. They had, because of the warming waters and the lack of the food that the right whales feed on in the Gulf of Maine, the copepods, for those of you who have never met a copepod, they're about the size of a grain of rice. And if any of you have watched SpongeBob SquarePants, that little wise-talking green guy with the one eye in the middle of his head, that's a copepod. But the copepods had moved, looking for colder water themselves, out of the Gulf of Maine. They were not in, the copepods were not in the Bay of Fundy, and the right whales knew that. They followed the colder water up into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And this is where we ran into a very high unusual mortality, because the right whales were not accustomed to the shipping traffic in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and into the St. Lawrence Seaway. And there were 13 or 14 North Atlantic right whales that were killed either by ship strikes or becoming entangled in crabbing gear up there, snow crabs. Canada responded very quickly with Trudeau slowing the ships down to try to stop this sudden mortality. The ship operators had no idea the whales were coming either. The whales had no knowledge of the shipping in that area or the crabbing, and they also shut down the crabbing areas where most entanglements were taking place. So it was an unexpected movement of large whales into that area, and we had quite a mortality that took place because of that. Okay, another look at their habitat here. This is the southeast coast. I was in on the first aerial surveys down here, which we did in 1984. And I'll show you a slide here a little bit coming up in the Bay of Fundy of a large group of right whales. But what we found down here was what we hoped to find, which was mothers with brand new calves in February, right off of Florida and Georgia. And I'll wait till we get to the other slide, remember. But this is what I was showing you before. They're feeding in the northeast up here. There's Roseway Basin, another area where right whales were gathering to feed, and still might in that area before now they're heading up into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And I will say the crab fishermen up here have been extremely helpful in trying to find solutions to the high mortality. And a lot of them are working with the ropeless fishing gear, which we'll talk about briefly here in a few minutes. Okay, starting in 2007, somewhere in that area is where we had the high mortality of whales. And this shows the calves that are born each year. Now, only 345 right whales in the area over the years. The calf count is not going to be especially high. And as the population drops, then so does obviously the amount of calves that can be born. With 345 right whales, and we think that less than 100 are females that can carry the population on. And they seem to be the ones most susceptible to getting entangled and being involved in ship strikes. Now, no one's really sure why. There's been a couple of hypotheses about that, as why the females seem to be getting hit more than the males, but it's not a good thing. The number of immortalities of right whales, the entanglements in gear and ship strikes are the number 1 and 2 reasons that for mortality that we're losing the population. There have been some estimates of the North Atlantic right whale in the next 15 to 20 years could become extinct. The low number of calves, the ship strikes, and the few females that are able to carry a calf to full term. And many of them are not, because of stress of being previously entangled. Females are not, in some cases, they're skipping the cycle that they would have had another calf. So there's a 2 to 3 year gap between calves, as it is there's a year of taking care of a calf where they don't get pregnant again, and then 2 years to recover before they get pregnant again. And if there's an entanglement involved in that, then we found that they are skipping one of the years that they would have had a calf, which is also causing a decline in the population. So it's a lot of numbers here, but to give you an idea, in this case, he was 36 dead, and the causes were unknown causes, 13. Sometimes they're seen floating dead and nothing can be done. They're out in the ocean. You can't do any kind of an examination on them. 12 vessel strikes, 9 entanglements, and 2 perinatal deaths. Those are calves that died within a couple of weeks of when they were born. And that's often ship strikes, and they have found entangled calves that have died within a few weeks of being born. Okay. This one here, you can see that ship strikes are purple, and they account for maybe a little over more than a dozen of the deaths there. And in 2000, let's see, in the oranges, entanglements and ship strikes, you can see are the number 1 of the 2 reasons for the highest mortality. And In 2022, there were none seen, only because maybe because they were offshore. There have been some seriously entangled right whales seen floating around, swimming around off of George's Bank, and nobody can get to them to rescue them to try to disentangle them. And sometimes they'll photograph the right whale, know who it is from the catalog, but some of them are never seen again after being photographed way offshore, entangled. And this is a brief they should be able to hear this.
We don't have sound, Scott.
2/3 of North Atlantic right whales illustrates how frequent these encounters are for this critically endangered species. Restricted mainly to the Northwest Atlantic, these whales have a global population estimated at only 450 individuals. The Consortium for Wildlife Bycatch Reduction is a group of scientists, fishermen, and engineers who have come together to find solutions to this threat. A major challenge we face in achieving our objective is that so little is known about the dynamics of encounters between whales and fishing gear. In the vast ocean, these encounters are rarely observed and never studied. So, with the help of Belquant Engineering, we are developing a virtual whale entanglement simulation model. The computer uses an anatomically precise rendering of a North Atlantic right whale and fishing ropes incorporating accurate engineering principles and properties. Real-time user interaction with the computer modeling system through a game-style controller allows fishermen, marine mammal, and conservation scientists, gear designers, and fisheries professionals to test various gear configurations and whale behavior what-if scenarios. The goal is to use this computer model to help us better understand how whale entanglements occur, how different gear interacts with whales, and allow mitigation strategies to be tested virtually. This virtual whale entanglement simulator represents a collaborative effort by marine mammal scientists, fishermen, fisheries professionals, and engineers to reduce severe entanglements of North Atlantic right whales.
Okay, and if you're wondering how, for the simulation that it was known how they get tangled, when the rescue teams are trying to untangle the whales and they're cutting rope and then pulling it off the whale, they can see which way the whale rolled in the water, trying to get the gear off of it itself. So if they're pulling it one way, if they're pulling this out one way, they know the whale rolled a certain way to get that gear around it the way that it is. Now, this is kind of an early calf. This photo was taken in Florida, as you can see by the writing. Snow cone 3560 is the official way that the whale is seen in the catalog. Snow cone is the name given it to it by a research team, and that would be having something to do with the position of the callosities, reminding somebody of a snow cone. But December is very early for a calf to be born, but you can see it's a very successful calf. Unfortunately, its mother has gear wrapped around it. And if you look up around the face, you can see that the gear goes through the whale's, the rope goes through the whale's mouth. It's probably entangled around her baleen. Most of the North Atlantic right whales are born in January and February. When I was doing the aerial surveys down there, that's when we would see the most of them, was usually in February. So this one was born December 2, which is fine. We think there's a 12-month gestation, which I will get at, or we always did think a 12-month gestation or pregnancy, which I'll talk a little bit more about here in a moment. Ropeless fishing is underway. at least with the research stages, it's working quite well. When this first came up many years ago, everybody thought, how in the world is that going to work? But ropeless is where you don't have any vertical lines in the water. You have horizontal lines where the traps are connected to each other. Most lobstering, for example, takes place with multiple traps all on one rope called a trawl, and that's down laying on the sea bottom. But then you have the vertical line with the buoy on it up at the top that you see when you're out or just walking on a beach. You can see the buoy sometimes for the lobster traps. They're in close to shore. The boats are being equipped with transducer, which sends down a signal into the water, which connects or alerts a receiver on the trap. Each trawl has just the lead trap with the gear on it, and that causes for example, the pop-up buoy here and the inflatable lift bag causes them to inflate, and they'll rise to the surface. Just the lead trap has that gear on it. The inflatables, they inflate instantly, and they rise and strong enough to take the rest of the traps up with them. So the lobsterman just needs to get the gear on the lead trap, and when that pops up to the surface, these are brightly colored objects, and they'll move the boat over to that and pull that first trap in, and all the other traps follow on the trawl. We haven't worked on that ourselves, although we've a very good friend of ours in Bangor, Maine, Zach Cliver, has been working with this with lobstermen out of Kennebunk, especially. And these traps have worked 100% of the time when they've pushed the button on the boat. The traps have come up. Some of the software problems, or not problems, but just they're working on, is not laying gear over each other. Lobstermen want to know where each other's gear is so they don't lay their trawls on top of somebody else's traps. And that's one of the a major problem right now is so the lobstermen know where their gear is, and also price, because a prototype of anything is fairly expensive, this type of technology. But it is working, and all the lobstermen who are experimenting with it from Cape Cod, Rob, what's his name?
Martin.
Yeah, Rob Martin is a lobsterman down in Cape Cod who has been pioneering this gear on his own business for several years now, and he's very high on it and knows what the problems are with concern about the technology, some of this technology, and the price. But it's looking very promising and something we can hope for, which will work. So that's called ropeless gear. And National Fisherman, which is a major magazine that comes out each month to the industry, I just wrote a favorable article about ropeless fishing and how it's going to alleviate a lot of problems once the minor glitches, are not really glitches, but just technology problems especially, need to be overcome, and we can get this to work correctly. It will eliminate entanglements. So more on that. If you're in the area, and I think you are, keep an eye open, an ear open for more information about inflatable, the ropeless gear with the inflatables. Okay, and the tags that are put on whales now, back to suction cups. The first tags that were put on whales, well, not the first. I remember working with some in Canada in the 1980s because we didn't like sticking things into whales. So it was the suction cups, and we thought, well, something has to stay on longer than that. So it was back to sticking things into whales through the thick blubber layer. Then that had some problems. Some whales developed infections where the tag had gone in. So we're back to suction cups and much better adhesives with them, where they will stay on now for a longer period of time. But the importance of this is if a whale is in an area, like a shipping area, and it has a tag on it, then a receiver is going to pick that up, and researchers can then radio to say a big cargo vessel coming into Boston or Portland, Maine, or somewhere in Nova Scotia, and alert them that there's a right whale in the area. And Because right whales are very slow-moving whales. They got the name right whale because they were the right whale to go kill by the early whaling industry. They're very slow-moving at 4 miles an hour. They are very large, and they have a very thick blubber layer, which melts down into extra barrels of oil. So they would call that. They would say, "Well, there's the right one over there." So they got the name the right whale, and they're just very slow to get out of the way of things because they're very slow-moving. And that's the way they evolved, and suddenly ships arrived in their lives, and we've had inevitable collisions over the decades since larger ships have come into the areas where whales have traditionally fed and bred. So there are right now volunteer efforts to get ships to slow down in right whale areas, and many of the shipping companies are working to do just that. And some of the ships are getting commendation awards. They can be tracked, and so it's known which ships are slowing down the most, and they're getting their companies are getting commendation awards, kind of like a report card. Okay, this is the slide I was talking about. This is right whales. It's 3 right whales in the Bay of Fundy, and I took this photo in October several years ago, and we came upon a group of 24 right whales, which turned out to be 3 females and about 21 males. And the males were very active, trying to mate with these 3 females. And the females, this is one of the females here we can see with the white chest and the chin sticking up. If this cursor works, the ends of the chin and the white chest. And she's being very evasive. Over here is the part of the tail fluke of another rolling North Atlantic right whale. And of course, you can see the back and head and nose right here of a male right whale. This male is trying to mate with this female that is rolling and trying to get away from him. So this was the time we thought courtship was taking place, if you can call this courtship. Courtship was taking place with North Atlantic right whales and mating, courtship and mating. But it appeared that the females were very evasive and very picky about who they were going to mate with. So we were just wondering if this is a mating activity, and the females are being so evasive, how is this successful? Well, later when we started doing aerial surveys in the Bay of Fundy, also one of the questions we had was in February, we'd find a mother and calf. The first time in 1984, when we found a mother and calf off the coast of Georgia, we were thrilled because that's what we'd gone down to find. And I did this for several more winters. But the question we had when we landed was, after we get done congratulating and high-fiving each other, was, wait a minute, if there's a 12-month gestation, as we assume or know for many other whales and assume for right whales, and they're mating in October, this is February, there's no way that's only 12 months. It's more like 16 months. So what's going on here? One possibility was that they have a delayed implantation where they mate and the egg does not, the larva does not develop, not larva, the egg does not develop, remains dormant for 3 months, 4 months. Or this preliminary activity that takes place in the fall is just that, preliminary activity. And maybe they do sort of couple off. Female decides who she wants to have an offspring with. A lot of ideas get tossed around with whales because we just don't know with many things. But we do know now that it's not a 12-month gestation. And I took a cruise out a few years ago in December, the middle of December, out of Southwest Harbor in Mount Desert Island. No, Mount Desert Island. And we left the dock at 4 a.m., spend a December day out in the Bay of Fundy on a very large boat, and found a lot of right whales, but we did not find any mating or courtship going on. So to make it short, we still don't know where the courtship grounds, mating grounds of the North Atlantic right whale are. We know the mothers and calves. Mothers go down to delivered calves in Florida, so it's not down there. So it's got to be somewhere in the middle of winter if it's a 12-month gestation. And that's one of the great mysteries in whale biology right now, is where right whales mate. And this quick video here is right whale skim feeding on copepods. There's the tongue, that white you see down there is the tongue. Here's the palate, roof of the mouth. This is the baleen hanging down, and they're skim feeding on copepods. Close the mouth. There you see the mouth's closing. And right now the whale will be moving its tongue up and down, scraping the copepods off the baleen, swallowing, and then opening the mouth to begin skimming again. And that's the baleen plates you can see hanging down right here, which the copepods get stuck inside of. And the right whale will continue that. What we don't know is how they pick which mat of copepods that they're going to feed on, because they will pass smaller groups of copepods and go after the densest ones that they're interested in. Oops. Oop. Okay, the gray whales, I'll show you the feeding behavior of gray whales. We had to eliminate a couple of different species here. We're going to show you how they feed just because of time. But watch the gray whale here feeding. They actually go down to the bottom and take a mouthful of the bottom. Doesn't sound very appetizing, but there's a mouth opening. You see the baleen. They'll take a mouthful of sand, mud, grit, close the mouth, right themselves, and then using their tongue, moving up and down, force the mud and silt out through the baleen plates on the side of the mouth. If you watch it, you can see now sand coming out of the side of the mouth, over the corner of the mouth, and whale taking another breath. And that all that other sand there is a whale rolling over it. All that sand is from the tail moving up and down, making sand plumes. Gray whale going down again. There's an exhale. You can see the nostrils opening and shutting. And the whale take another sideways mouthful of the bottom and force that out through the sides of the mouth. And you can see the sand right there coming out through the baleen plates and over the lower lip. A lot of energy for a mouthful of sand. And hopefully the small amphipods that they feed on. This is the mouth opening and shutting again. Okay, now where do we work? Out here, we are in California, as Suzanne mentioned, and right now, and we are from Maine. Recently just sold our house in Cape Nettic a couple of weeks ago, and we came back for the closing. And then we've been coming out here since 2014, but winters only, and decided to come out and pursue this full time. We are at Point Arena, for any of you who know the area. We're no, we're not. We're about 113 miles north of San Francisco in Point Arena in Mendocino County. Is the tallest lighthouse on the west coast of the United States. It's 153 feet. And it was 153 steps, 153 feet. And there's a great vantage point because this sticks out 2 miles into the ocean's peninsula. And this is our location. We're shore-based. And as the gray whales are migrating, they go down the coast here anywhere from a few hundred yards offshore to maybe 5 miles. And you can easily see the whales 5 miles away if the weather is at all decent. So we've been doing this now since 2014, and we're the only ones in this area doing a census. Okay, how often, how long do we observe? 4 to 7 hours each day, depending on the conditions. This says September through May. This is going to be year-round now, but the gray whale migration is December for us. They get to our area in December from the Arctic. They feed in the Arctic, and by the time they get to us heading to Mexico, it's early December, mid-December, and they continue past us, and then they turn around and go back to the Arctic. So we're able to count them December through May, going either north or south, or sometimes in both directions, with them passing each other. So we count and record the migrating grays, both southbound and northbound, and other species of marine mammals that we see. These are some of the species that we do see. Sorry if that's a cross. It was grays, humpbacks, finbacks, blues, and minke whales. except for grays, you have, except for grays and blues, you commonly have humpbacks, finbacks, and minkies out there in the Gulf of Maine. Dolphins, we have several species of dolphins, including killer whales, fairly commonly, and the harbor porpoise, which you have lots of right there off of Lod Home Farm. Okay, examples of other baleen. You saw the baleen on the right whale is just feeding. The one on the left here is a humpback whale, and you can see the pink palate in its mouth as well. Very hairy and matty baleen to make sure nothing escapes. And on the right-hand side here is the very thick, strong and short baleen of a gray whale, because you just saw that one biting the bottom. So you don't want long, fragile baleen if you're going to do that. You want thick and sturdy baleen. And you all know about the warming of the seas. The Gulf of Maine is warming much faster than many areas. And this is called the carbon pump. And you'll see this, how quickly this moves and how fast carbon is building up in the environment. Now, right here is January 1979. There were 336 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. Over here is the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. And up here is the years passing by. You can see how quickly the carbon is building up in our environment. Now, as what's considered to be the point of no return is when we hit 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit rise in worldwide temperature. And at one point, it was hoped that we would not exceed 400 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, but this will go to 2022. And in a few seconds here, you'll see what level we've reached. You know, now the more carbon in the atmosphere, the warmer the Earth gets. And this carbon pump, if you're teaching or you want to use it for something, is readily available on YouTube. We used it in two classes university classes I took in the past year, which is at Stanford. But we use this pump in two classes. And I lifted it off of YouTube myself. Okay, you can see now we're up to a total of 418 parts per million officially. Some of it has spiked higher than that worldwide. So we've passed the 400 threshold that we had hoped for. And pre-industrial was 278. In March of, jumps around a bit here. March of 1958, our level was 316. We're now up to 418. And in the interest of time here, we'll move on. The ice ages was estimated at 185 from drilling down through ice sheets, the amount of carbon that was available. Okay, on the right hand, this is a NOAA team doing what we do in much more luxurious facilities. They were watching for migrating gray whales going by. And but the right here is a infrared camera. Tree and I experimented with one of these prototypes back in 2014 or 15 I think it was. There's a company trying to perfect these so that what the point of them is that they detect heat and they can be used to count whales after dark, hopefully, and give an idea of the amount of, we know that whales move 24 hours a day, but just how many are going by. That number is lost to us because we can't see at night, but the infrared can pick up their blows. As they exhale, that blow is about 100 degrees as it leaves their body, and that makes quite a signature for one of these cameras. Okay, and then the movements of the gray whales. We always thought, and what I used to teach when I was teaching my night class at the University of New Hampshire, was that the gray whales go up and down the West Coast. They feed in the Arctic, and they mate and breed and give birth in the lagoons, the warm lagoons of Baja California. Well, when Tree and I got out here and started working with gray whales, we right away found out it was a little more complicated than that. As usual, And it wasn't just a matter of, as a friend of mine at the New England Aquarium used to say, they just crawl up and down the West Coast. There's a little more to it. Dr. Jim Sumich has written a book and put out a nice diagram here of the actual movements. The yellow there, or orange, whatever you want to call that, true Easterners are what I was talking about. They go up into the Arctic, the Bering Sea, and the Chukchi Sea, and the Beaufort Sea, but primarily the Bering Sea, to feed during the summer, which is where the gray whales are now. And then in the fall, they begin moving down to Mexico, so they do follow the coast. That part is true, but what we know now is that there's a group that does not go all the way to the Arctic, and it's the same group of gray whales each day, and they're called the Pacific Coast Feeding Group, and there's several dozen of them. They go into the Puget Sound area, and there's another group there called the Sounders, after Puget Sound. They're feeding on ghost shrimp, thank you, the ghost shrimp in that area. There's another group on the East Coast, the Westerners on the west side of the Pacific, and they're called the Westerners, and they migrate between Russia and Korea, and that's just a couple hundred. But what we didn't know until Bruce Mate from Oregon State University and his group of students went over to the Russian side and put tags on the gray whales over there, thinking that they would just go down to Korea. But no, they went across, completely unknown to any of us, is that they went across the ocean basin, across the Gulf of Alaska, over to the West Coast, and then down and down into Mexico. So there's another group that's actually the Trans-Pacifics. So it's a little more complicated than we ever thought. Just one humorous thing was that one of the whales that they put a tag on, as over in Russia, went across and down, and when it got off of Oregon, right off the campus of Oregon State, it lost the tag. It shook the tag off. So all of a sudden the whale wasn't moving. It was just this blipping off their campus. So they went out in a boat and picked up the tag, which the whale had shed for them. So that's the situation with the movements of gray whales moving up and down the coast and across the Pacific. And another look at the migration route from Magdalena Bay and then along the peninsula of Baja. There are many little lagoons in there that these whales use, gray whales use for mating and calving activity. And these are actually nursery areas where the mothers will keep the calves for a number of months until they're ready. These newborn calves are ready to swim 7,000 or 8,000 miles, 7,000 or 8,000 miles up to the feeding grounds in the Beaufort, Bering, and Chukchi Sea. So you've got to have a calf that's really strong to survive that swim and make it past the gauntlet of killer whales. One thing here to notice is this is called Unimak Pass. That's the Aleutian Islands. And Unimak Pass is where thousands of gray whales filter through to get into the Bering Sea. It's a pass here in the Aleutian Islands in a chain. And for all you seabird fans, this is Unimak Pass, and that's several million shearwaters. You come into that area to forage and feed themselves. And Doug Forsell here is a neighbor of ours, and he gave me this slide. Doug worked for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for about 45 years, and gave me the slide, as I said. I asked Doug how many, he was stationed in the Aleutian Islands for a number of years. I asked Doug how many shearwaters they estimated were in Unimak Pass or in this photo, and he said, pick any number and put the word million after it. It could be 12 million, 8 million. We couldn't tell. It was just way too many birds to try and estimate. Well, these are shearwaters, mostly graders, he said, greater shearwaters. And this is Unimak Pass. And another look at the gray whale migration. They're not all just filtering or crawling down the coast, as my friend had said, but we know now that from some aerial surveys that gray whales go past us. We get the up north here, we get the entire migration going by us, mostly orderly, but they are all going at once, going down. But when they get to Santa Barbara, we're about 113 miles north of San Francisco. So when they get past us and get down to Santa Barbara, they branch off into about, just to make things interesting, they branch off into about five or six fingers here. So only a small group goes down the rest of the coast and into Mexico. The rest here branch out, and then they all do clump back together well south of Tijuana and head down to the lagoons together. So why they do that, who knows? But it means that the census takers below us, south of us, don't get the full picture of how many gray whales are going. Okay, and just how you photo ID these guys, a lot of scarring on the bodies. You saw how they feed, they roll in the sand and grit, and they do get scarred up. These white marks on them, these round circles, are a bit of a mystery. Just now getting some publicity, believe it or not, but it's not, it doesn't appear to be lampreys, and it seems to be raised skin lesions, and we're not really sure what caused them. And you can also photograph them by the tails. Here's one here that had its tails decorated by a killer whale. These are all tooth marks. Killer whale was grabbing at its, or killer whales was grabbing at its flukes. And some of these are barnacle scars, and others just scars from life. And remember how they feed. It's a little rough on them. Okay, and Tree is going to take over now and introduce a very brief film that we are in very briefly ourselves.
We had the privilege of being a part of this short documentary film called Washed Ashore. These are two students from University of Berkeley. They spent an entire day with us out where we observed from, and they really did put together a very informative and interesting video that really will show you the whole picture of what has been happening to the gray whale population. So I hope you will enjoy it. Oh. Right here. Oh, great. Oh, geez. Oh my gosh.
When the whale approaches to you and you see the size of the animals, the head and the eye, looking at you, why these big animals comes here, huh? And why they are not afraid of us. It's amazing. This lagoon, it's important for the gray whales because they can rest from that long migration and stay safe inside of the lagoons. We live in tents for 3 months, monitoring the gray whale population here in Laguna San Ignacio. We have noticed that many whales, when they arrive, they are in bad condition. When I joined to this project in 2008, there were only a few skinny whales. For the last 2 years, we have had more than 20% of skinny whales.
They really can't feed here. That's why they go all the way to Alaska, where there's a lot more food. So it's a long way back. And once you see them that skinny, you're like, oof, it's going to be tough for them to really come back. And you know that some of them maybe end up stranding. Extinction has always been there. It doesn't mean they're going extinct at the moment, but the problem is the speed that it's going, it's directly involved to humans. It's really a collaboration between different countries, labs, scientists working year-round, so trying to figure out what's going on.
In the US and Canadian waters, there are a lot of teams working with the gray whales, but almost all the information from the gray whales in Mexico comes from us. We try to assess how many whales with poor conditions can we see in a season to see if it's getting better or if this problem is continuing for more years.
We did have a dead gray whale wash up in this little cove here at one point. It was kind of really hard to get at. We're used to seeing them transiting through the area, but not staying inside the bay. It's really, really striking. So it's been nearly a year since they were in the feeding grounds. They've been fasting largely all that time through the breeding season. They're getting hungry and they're seeking shelter, really a place to rest and perhaps get a snack. Really, this is like a crime scene investigation. So we want to be really careful not to state emphatically the cause of what's going on. But we do know the causes of death include malnutrition, but also ship strike. We think of whales as being really big, right? They're huge, they're the biggest animals on Earth. But we have container ships that are 1,000 feet long. And so if you look at like a gray whale next to these large vessels, the size difference would be like if you lay down on the runway in front of a 747. A boat like that, they could hit a whale and not even feel it.
When a whale is emaciated or skinny and not as healthy as it should be, it is more prone and more susceptible to other issues like getting entangled.
All right, he's scoping us out. Just moving up, moving quick. All right.
Primarily along the California coast, we see a lot of entanglements in fishing gear. We will either grab a hold of the entanglement coming off of the whale directly, or we may need to use special tools to reach the entanglement that's on the whale.
Okay, now you can let that go. Give it a bend.
In this co-occurrence where we have more happening in the ocean and more whales in the same space, their risk of entanglement is increased.
Yes, glorious.
When we get a live whale report in the bay, my only thought is, please don't die. A necropsy is an examination of a carcass to determine what the cause of death was. It's a tragedy that they have to die in order for them to be available to science, but each one is really a unique opportunity to research.
Started, Mo has an announcement for folks.
It was reported alive, and then when the team responded in the afternoon that day, it had died. I mean, this is a classic on how skinny this whale was.
Let me just verify that we've had no Oregon, Washington, or Alaska or Canada whales that I don't know about.
Yes. The Mercers who do that survey up in Mendocino, they're still seeing good migration north.
This guy's right in front of us. He's moving fast, 235.
I wouldn't say traveling together, like one and one. You can see them without binos.
Yeah, we're lucky today. There's so many visible without binoculars.
Yes.
We don't know exactly how many dying because they don't all wash ashore. For everyone that washes up, there are 8 to 10 that we don't know about.
In 1999 to 2000, there was another unusual mortality event for the gray whales, and the population did recover very nicely. But, you know, everything about it, though, says that there's something deeper going on here.
When a population is showing signs of, you know, malnutrition and starvation, that's a real warning sign. These animals do feed in the Arctic, And we know that there are large ecological changes going on in the Arctic that appear to be related to global climate change. The summer sea ice in the Arctic is down dramatically. And there appears to be a link between the food these animals prefer and the ice. The way things appear to be going with the global climate, we should expect to see more and more significant changes in these animals. These animals are sort of sentinels of the sea, but they're also indicators of ocean health.
Well, the last one that came out, it's a skinny whale. So you can see a little depression over the head. So that's one of the indications that's a skinny whale.
Each time you look at something and look more closely, it brings up another question. And then you look at that question, then you have another question. And like science is all about answering those questions. 100 years from now, 200 years from now, someone can look back and hopefully use those samples to answer some questions.
There's a lot of studies that have been done about whales, but still so many things that we don't know and we don't understand completely. It's a roller coaster of emotions.
These animals, so much of their lives is a mystery. Our understanding today is not going to be the same as our understanding tomorrow. And that's the great voyage of discovery.
I know that was probably difficult to watch, and it truly is, but it's important to see the situation as it exists. And I would like to update you on some of those numbers. As of June 25th, there were actually a total of 674 dead gray whales that have stranded, and that may only represent 10% of gray whales that have died since 2019. And I'm going to, actually the decline now is 46% along the West Coast since 2016. These are NOAA's numbers. You could see the decline from 2016 to the current estimation for the population is only 14,526. I took our numbers, the data that we collected in our surveys from those same years, and our decline has been at 41%. So it is a similar decrease in this population. We are anxiously awaiting for the calf count, the official calf count, to be released to the public. That usually becomes available from NOAA in August. And We just want to thank you for your attention today and for listening to our presentation.
Thank you so much, Scott and Theresa.
Sure, you're welcome.
Does anybody have questions out there? Feel free to just unmute yourself and ask them.
I do. Scott and Theresa, thank you. This is going back to the right whales on our coast. And I was just curious, let's say a tagged right whale does ping a receiver and a researcher is able to alert the transportation authorities, and this message gets relayed to ships in the area. What is, like, how small or specific, I guess, is the location of the whale, or whales plural, I would assume, if lots of them are feeding in the area, that they're able to give the ships?
They can pinpoint that. And with the whale's movements, it comes right down to an exact number, a GPS, or I was going to say Loran, but GPS has taken that over. It should be very specific as to where the whale is. From there, it's the part of the people in the ship to be watching and find where the whale is, because they do move. They move slowly, but they move around. So they may be pinpointed, but still they need to get some eyes on the whale when it comes up to breathe. And because whales can't stop on a dime, they do, move through the water. Even if they pull the controls back, a boat still slides through the water. So it has to be very exact, and they need to really get some eyes on the position of that whale. And I'm sure you've seen photos of whales, of boats, these big ships coming into the harbors with a dead whale strapped over the bow. And sometimes they've carried that dead whale for a mile or more before getting into the harbor. So it's important they actually see the whale and not just know there's one there. But I mentioned, the shipping companies are trying to slow down and not be part of this.
Yeah, to your knowledge, do they have, protocols and things like that, that once a whale is seen, that message is received, how a ship reacts in terms of, looking for that? Or
yeah, well, slowing right down, if they come into an area where there are right whales seen traditionally, if they will lower their speed, and then if they get an alert, even slow even more, then that's a big help, because that's especially if they're moving around at night, which is really difficult. But that's all they can do really, is just slow right down.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because stopping is just really hard because of the movement of the boat in itself. That's a good question, because that's a really big topic. Each time there's a large consortium of us get together, it's how the shipping industry is responding to this. And there's pretty good data, because the ships are followed on radar and GPS, and how many ships in an area, and that's how they know to send out awards, these award certificates, to the boating companies that are doing the best, shipping companies that are doing the best.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, one person you get in touch with is David Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y. He's the superintendent now of the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. And in fact, David has spoken there at the at Lodholm, where he's hosting us today. David has spoken there in person, and I've known David since the 70s. And Dave Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y, at Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. He could give you some good ideas and some good data, because that's what they're involved in, is the shipping lanes going right into Boston, right through these feeding grounds.
Yeah.
Right through the middle of the feeding grounds.
Rosemary, you had a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering the truth to, I've heard like on the news that a lot of whales were dying off the coast of New Jersey due to the wind farms and the sonar. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of whales dying there, but in talking to biologists down there and the whale watching ships, whale watching boats out of New York, including New York City. There's one actually called Gotham Whale Watch. It sounds like Batman, but Gotham Whale Watch. Talking to those guys, they feel that it's ship strikes, and that not the whale, not the not the wind farm construction going on, because the whales that they've been able to take a look at, the carcasses of them, it's obvious that they've been struck. So ship strikes seem to be the problem. Now, whether or not some of that is, I don't know, so I'm just saying this. So whether or not some of those ship strikes are coming from boats going in and out to the construction of these wind farms, I don't know. Ships could be just, large commercial ships, or ships just in the area, or ships involved with the construction of the wind farms. But it appears to be ship strikes. Whether it's what kind of ship, I don't know. But that's what the claims that we're hearing. We just had a online meeting of people working along the East Coast, and that was in fact, the whale watch operators down there were adamant that the deaths have nothing to do with the construction of the wind farms, that it is ship strikes.
Thank you. I also wanted to tell you that I live in St. Augustine in the winter months, and I am on the survey team with Jim Haynes out of Marineland. So I am out there like you, watching those right whales go by.
Yeah, you was Jim Haynes? You say Jim Haynes?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've known Jim a long, long time. I once directed him. He was in a blimp, the big blimp with Snoopy on the side. Next time you see Jim, see if he remembers that. He was coming out of Woods Hole with the Snoopy blimp, and I was in a boat down on the water directing him to finback whales that he wanted to photograph from the air. Yeah, Jim's a great guy. I'm really glad you know him.
Yes, I enjoy doing it too on the survey team.
Yeah. Yeah, some of us are doing this a long time.
I've been doing it for over 10 years, so I've been doing it a while too, since I retired.
We used to be stationed out of Amelia Island, Fernandina Beach.
Right.
And Georgia, but the last few years I did it, we were in Fernandina. We used to fly right over where you are now. We were the only ones down there at the time, just the New England Aquarium, and then Florida Fish and Game got in, and others. So the area is pretty well covered now.
It is covered. Yeah, absolutely. We have quite a large team.
Yeah, thanks for doing that.
You're welcome.